You're listening to New York's only home for Reefer Madness. Every week, we'll explore the unique perspective of cannabis in the global hub of commerce and culture. Hear the insights, stories, challenges, and successes of those blazing a path from Brooklyn to Buffalo and everywhere in between. I'm your host, Kalen Castetter, coming to you from the Green Valley of Opportunity, Binghamton, New York. This is the Empire State of Cannabis. Hello and welcome to another episode of Empire State of Cannabis. Today we have Kristin Jordan. She's the founder of Mannada, founder of the Maze Cannabis Community Event Organizing, serves as the Director of Real Estate for Acreage Holdings, and serves on the Committee for Cannabis for the New York State Bar Association. Welcome to the show, Kristin.
Hi, Kalen. Thanks so much for having me. So nice to be here.
Absolutely. So let's jump in and talk about how you got into the cannabis industry in New York and a little bit of the backstory on that.
Yeah. So about 6 years ago in 2014, I knew about the medical marijuana program being passed in New York and the excitement around the impending medical program. As somebody who practice as an attorney and service the hospitality industry, specifically with liquor license applications, I saw an opportunity to serve this emerging industry in preparing applications for entry into the program. Unfortunately, we were a little late to the party in 2014 in really gaining a client base. And as you know, we did not open up for new applications in the next new round. So in terms of a viable opportunity for me and creating a business line for my law practice, it really was not an option and still remains not an option in New York State. So we ended up pivoting and just sort of assessing what was happening in 2014, 2015 in the New York City area. And we just saw a number of groups meeting, meetup groups, specifically High NY. Our friend Mike Z was doing some informative events, educational events, community events, and we just sort of took a look at what was happening and tried to make space for some additional programming.
Yeah, so there's a lot of events, right? And you see events and panels, discussions crop up around cannabis all the time. So, what do you think? What did you see that was missing there and that was needed, especially in New York?
Well, I really love the way that you phrase that question, Kaylin. So I'm somebody who, I'll look around and try to find space for myself personally as an introvert, somebody who is self-proclaimed socially awkward. And, I just found that there were a lot of activities emanating from the West Coast, and certainly that was obviously the much more mature market. And the speakers were coming from the West Coast. And being a lifelong New Yorker, I just really thought that not only do we live differently, we operate differently, we interact with one another differently, our demographics are different, but I believe that the way that we purchase and consume cannabis is and will be different.
Yeah.
And I thought it was important for us to raise up legacy folks and emerging leaders to speak about how we were going to operate differently. So what I saw missing was, number one, there wasn't as much attention to industries that would be supporting the cannabis industry. So for me specifically, I'm in real estate, and the majority of the large brokerage firms were just not in a position to participate in the industry back in 2015. And quite frankly, still have very conservative boards and are reluctant to enter in full force, while there are still some brokers, some owners, some small participants who sort of are on the fringes of the industry. Real estate as a whole has not really embraced cannabis as yet. So rather than complaining about the lack of education and information for my specific industry, I saw it as an opportunity to create those intersections. So we started with the Cannabis Law Summit. As an attorney, we just thought it was a great opportunity for us to train attorneys and the legal profession around the emerging industry with a specific eye towards social justice and the impact, understanding the impact of the war on drugs on marginalized communities. So we always try to present the information through the lens of prohibition and the war on drugs and how we got to this place, because it is so important for us to recognize, especially in New York.
Yeah, and so it's interesting. You talk about the legacy market, and for those that don't know, so basically, legacy operators would be those that are existing in the illicit marketplace, right? And when we think about those operators, they have the most experience, right? And some would argue they have the most right to be participating in a space that is going to generate, large amounts of revenue. So you took the path of, okay, let's engage them and educate, but how important is that in general to engage the legacy market, and what does that look like in terms of licensing and applications in order to get them into the legal marketplace?
Yeah, I think you're hitting on some of the biggest challenges for folks who care about, and I know it's important to you as well, Kaylin. I
Mm,
know that the legacy market not only affects brown and black folks, and specifically, I'm in the New York City market, but I hail originally from Syracuse in
mm,
upstate, and what I'm learning is that legacy market looks very different in upstate, and while I don't have much experience as an adult participating in the legacy market in Syracuse. I do know that it's a vibrant market, and certainly
yeah.
folks who have other demographics participated and helped to provide medicine and wellness products to folks upstate as well. So I think what I'm learning through this experience is that uh, you know every community is different. Every community has different needs, and marginalized communities vary depending on geographics and demographics. So for New York State, it's hard to speak about one specific legacy market, because
Mm.
I think to do so doesn't do justice to folks in other parts of the state that were also and continue to provide medicine. As we know, the medical market is very limited, and leaves vast, wide parts of New York, without medicine.
Yeah.
And so those.
And that's a huge problem. But I think also when you look at the legacy market and, drawing on your experience in real estate and also licensing, will it prevent a problem for legacy operators when they're going for a license and they need to either own or lease a property before they even know they've been awarded a license, right, through the application process? But if they go to get a mortgage or they're trying to provide references for a lease, is it going to be a challenge because maybe they don't have a bank account or maybe they don't have traditional audited finances in order to get, I mean, getting a mortgage is going to be difficult in general, but even if the landowner has a mortgage and that mortgage doesn't allow them to lease to a cannabis operator, do you see that as a significant barrier of entry? And do you think there's a solution to that to help these legacy operators, have a place that they can call their own?
Yeah, 100%. I think this is you're identifying the biggest key issue. And I spoke at an event put on by the Minority Cannabis Business Association before the quarantine. I think it was in January here in New York City, and one of the keynote speakers was Commissioner Shalene Title, based out of Massachusetts.
Hmm.
And a question was posed to her, and I thought it was really interesting. The question was asked, in hindsight, what would you have done differently to create pathways for legacy market folks to participate in the licensed industry? And I thought it was so interesting that Commissioner Title actually said that she would have started with the legacy folks first, as
Hmm.
opposed to bringing them into a market. It would have made more sense for her, from her vantage point, to start with their needs and to sort of build a program around them. Because, as you say, these are folks who have books of business, have earned trust and loyalty with their customer base, are knowledgeable about the product. I mean, listen, let's be adults here. I mean, the legacy market has come a long way from just knocking on your door with a baggie. I mean, there
Sure.
are
Yeah.
educated consumers now who understand what they want in terms of provenance, medical and wellness effects. I mean, this is a much more educated and knowledgeable consumer.
And sophisticated
So our
supply chain too. The supply chain has
absolutely,
become, a lot more complex, and is almost reflecting what we see in legal market states, right? But it's
that's
interesting
right.
because California has had a real tough time, with the informal market, because it cuts in their taxes. So, you know, and I thought the bar association in their annual report, it was very interesting because they said we can't be above Colorado in terms of tax rates, right? Because we're not going to get rid of that. And then, we need to do more studying in terms of revenue allocation and social equity programs, as the marketplace sets off, because and the report makes an important distinction. New York, they said we have not been able to find another state or program that can parallel what New York's needs, right? So what are your thoughts on that? What do you think in terms of, when lawmakers are looking to put a tax structure in place or allocation structure in place, should they look to other states to parrot a program, or should they look to other states as a cautionary tale like California?
I think it's the latter rather than the
Mm,
former. And I think you're really you're pointing out some of the biggest challenges is in that this is a nascent industry, and we don't
mm,
have examples that we can point to. I mean, even Canada is still figuring out, how to go about this, and certainly they live and breathe very differently than we do, and their considerations for impacted people are very different. So I don't think that we do have a good model, and
mm,
so often folks are looking for those, the soundbite answer for how we address this. I think one of the most important things for transitioning legacy into um, an adult use market is thinking about tax amnesty. I mean, you pointed this out very articulately earlier in that, we will make these folks, these applicants, liars by filling out certain forms because they don't have a safe and legal way to record their income.
mm.
And so to provide indemnities or some sort of amnesty to shield them from federal prosecution, I think is important, not only important, but imperative. Otherwise, we will see continued activity on the legacy market. But, I do believe as a consumer that it is important to bring legacy into the industry because of the protections that it affords a consumer, in that the testing, the reliance on the packaging and the regulatory bodies to do all the things that we expect from packaged goods is important. But at the same time, as you point out, to leave these folks who have done the literally put their bodies on the line to transport and provide medicine is an unjust way to introduce an industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And so on the real estate side, 'cause we kind of touched on that. I think a lot of mid-sized cities and towns throughout the state are looking at, some of there's been some large deals, there's been some large acquisitions just here in Binghamton. There's been some large real estate acquisitions. Um, and I think they're looking at cannabis to fill these industrial spaces. In your experience, is that a realistic view? And, what should property owners, what should IDAs, counties, governments be looking at in terms of servicing the cannabis industry from a real estate perspective?
So I think real estate gets a little bit tricky, and specifically when you're talking about the cultivation and the manufacturing, that gets a little bit tricky because I think it's yet to be seen whether verticality will continue in
Mm,
post COVID, and whether that's a practical way for this industry to continue. We've already seen, the struggles that large MSOs have in being vertical, and quite frankly, we don't see this in any other industry. I mean, nobody's
yeah.
asking McDonald's to raise the cow, to process the burger, and then to sell it. So I just don't see that as a viable way for this industry to continue. And so, to that
Mm,
end, I think that there will be folks who will silo into their specialties, right? So a cultivator who has that mastery should continue on that vein. But some of these large MSOs that are retail heavy should focus on that part of the business. And I don't have predictions around the cultivation and the processing side, just because I think it's so tied to licensing and how the states move.
Hmm.
But I do have some hope on the retail side. I mean, I live in the Upper West Side of Manhattan. I look out my window and, we look down Broadway, and there are just so many vacancies because not only of COVID, but, just in general, retail is brick and mortar retail is moving more and more to virtual scenarios, which makes sense for consumers. But, what does that mean for the future of cities? And
Right.
I think that cannabis will provide those opportunities. And I think, I get excited when I talk to real estate communities and industry folks, because they have such blinders on when they think about the industry, and they think about growing, selling, and that's it. And Kaylin, I know you've been in this for as long as I have, if not longer, and that retail is not limited to that. There are yoga studios, there are consumption opportunities, there
Yeah.
are fitness opportunities. I mean, just the ancillary industry, similar to the gold rush. The folks who went out west for the gold rush, the picks and the shovel purveyors, the folks who were selling those items, they were the ones who made the money, not the folks who were hammering looking for gold. And
Yeah.
I think that, like myself as a education provider, there are going to be opportunities, consultants, all these other opportunities that'll grow up alongside and provide, retail plays as well for the real estate
Yeah,
industry.
and that's very interesting. So when you talk about these, other ways to go about retail in terms of on-site consumption and fitness and everything that goes along with that, I feel like New York is a little special in that aspect too, because New York already has uh, a, a infrastructure for these kind of needs, for these kind of lifestyle demands, right? Um, so, how important do you think adult use consumption and on-premise consumption? How important is that? I mean, we see it in alcohol, right? Imagine the alcohol industry without on-premise consumption, right? I mean, it's kind of funny to think about now, but you see states that haven't allowed for it. Massachusetts is just getting around to, I think, approving their first on-premise consumption site. I mean, Colorado has an informal on-premise consumption area. There's a couple municipalities in California. How important is it, do you think, for New York to get it right, not just for the city, but also for agro-tourism destinations in upstate New York?
I mean, listen, we're seeing the hospitality industry just be decimated by
Yeah.
COVID. And, this provides an opportunity to really revitalize and create new opportunities. And I think it spans, the idea of a euphoria setting, maybe like a bar or something where you're going for a joyful consumption. But it really, it goes so much further than that, because it has that wellness component, and that you can see it in spas and health and fitness scenarios. So it's not just limited to this euphoria sort of bar scenario that frankly makes some folks a little bit nervous. It just has such larger breadth and reach than any other product that we've seen. So to put barriers around what this could be. I mean, I think about bed and breakfasts, hotels. Some folks would think it would be challenging to put in ventilation systems to already existing hotels. Well, I would go one further and say convert the whole hotel. I know, many folks who would pay a premium to come and stay at a place that felt safe and welcome, and allowed you to consume without having to fear that additional $300 deposit, or
Yeah.
fear of being reported to law enforcement or what have
Y-
you.
Yeah.
And
And a
folks
place where
will
there's,
come.
yeah, a place that's more inclusive, where there's,
That's
individuals
right.
who are like-minded, who are also consuming, and maybe there's activities focused towards that. And I think, and I've had conversations with different, leaders of chambers of commerce and, counties, et cetera, and they like the demographics of cannabis consumers, right? When you get past this stigma, when you break down the stigma and you look at who a cannabis consumer is, and that's kind of hard because it's very wide, right? But they're usually, not only just civically engaged, right, but they also enjoy more of an active lifestyle. They enjoy nature. They enjoy experiences, right? They're a little more experience based, right? So I think that plays very well, and almost by cutting off that entire part of the marketplace, it's almost that lawmakers need to understand, the consumer needs to understand how cannabis operates already, as, and fits into consumers' lives and New Yorkers' lives in order to really create a regulatory structure that works for it. But is there barriers though beyond just what the regulations and the laws will be for these places in New York City, like in municipalities, zoning issues, issues with mortgages? Is there other issues that New York State maybe needs to tackle, or the federal government needs to tackle, independent of direct? This is the adult, this is the MRTA, this is the CRTA, that will help foster these businesses to grow in places like Manhattan, but also Binghamton and everywhere in between.
Sure, I think absolutely. You point to the municipal local laws. I mean, it was never contemplated that consumption was going to become legal and to be a mainstream intoxicant available to everybody. So I think nothing is going to be an easy fix across the board. And I think as we roll this out, as we've seen in other states, new considerations will come up. I mean, one of the things I think about in New York City, the current regs suggest that the buffers for schools and churches and places of worship, the buffer is only comes into play when that establishment occupies the entire building, which is not the norm in New York City.
Hmm.
And so, there are regulations that I think will be more thorough and thought through. So I think the intent behind a law like having a buffer around a school, right, is so that children are not walking by and seeing cannabis consumed. And perhaps that makes sense. But if that's the intention, and when we play it out in places like New York City, and it's just not a practical consideration because very few schools occupy the entire building, these are just considerations that we need to think about, how they actually work in reality versus what's on paper. And I think we'll see that play out all over the place. I think local municipal laws that were intended for specific types of regulatory control won't necessarily work for cannabis, and vice versa. And there'll need to be other adjustments made.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think education is key for that. But also that the state gets, I mean, there is the right to farm law on the books, right? And so that, prevents municipalities from infringing on the rights of agriculture in terms of zoning, and maybe something needs to be looked at in a scaled down version, but something like that for cannabis too, because you don't want municipalities to be looking at from a political perspective and to, completely cut off we spoke to the mayor of Homer, who's also Hal McCabe, who's also involved in legalization efforts in the Senate, the Rural Resources Committee. But he said, listen, you don't want a county, maybe a conservative leaning county or a county that's going to make a political decision, completely cut off the ability for these towns to make their own decisions for their own residents, and also gain that revenue. So I think that's it's an important point that you made. So on your business with the events, how has COVID, are you still having events virtually? How did you transition, pivot? What's going on in that world?
Yeah, we're still trying to figure it all out. So Mannada is our parent company, and that's a Korean word. It means to meet, to gather, to
Hmm.
experience, to come together. And actually, we chose that word because we didn't want to have an association with cannabis out of fear of losing our bank account.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you. So 5.5 years later, and we just lost our Stripe account about a month and a
Oof.
half ago. And
Yeah.
honestly, we haven't had an event in about a year. So it's interesting to see how that continues on the banking side. But for Mannada, we do a handful of events, and our whole thing, our whole experience is about being in person and what that means to sit together at a table and to eat ethnic food together, and to rub shoulders with the likes of Commissioner Title, or from Mark to Sullivan, or so for folks in New York to have those experiences where oftentimes you'd have to go to Vegas for MJ Biz in order to even catch a glimpse of some of those speakers. So
Yeah.
COVID has really impacted us in that we're rethinking this. What does it mean to have an experience virtually? Is that even something that we're skilled at providing? And so we're rethinking the Cannabis Media Summit, which would normally take place in October. A lot of me thinks that it's important, especially because our theme was going to be pot and politics.
Hmm.
And Joe Biden's platform is not necessarily what we'd like it to be as activists. And
Or the
I think there's
DNC.
still opportunity. Yeah, yeah, exactly. The DNC. Yeah,
Yeah.
right, exactly. So I think it's important for us to do that, but we're not exactly, well, me, I'm not exactly sure. I'm not exactly savvy enough to understand, what platforms to use. And so some of it's just logistics. The other part of me is just, I'm also a human being and dealing with COVID, and, I have good days and bad days, and motivation is just not necessarily where it used to be. And so I'm dealing with my own self motivation and trying to figure out, um, where my limited bandwidth is best utilized as well. We continue to publish the Maze, which is the online calendar that lists all of the events that are happening. We used to have 10 newsletters that serviced all different cities around the country. But we are not promoting any online events. I know there are some cities that are permitting that, but just as a company, we just decided that it just doesn't make sense for us to do that, put folks in harm's way, and folks do rely on our knowledge of the events. So we just promote online events for right now.
Yeah, and I wonder if people are a little burnt out on looking at a Zoom screen, looking at their computer screen, and they're missing that human interaction. And this won't be forever, but the thing is a post-COVID, well, not post-COVID, but when people can gather together, New York is going to need that, because New York has seen a large exodus and their tourism has gone way down. And New York is going to need the economic stimulus. It's going to need the moral stimulus, right? It's
Yeah.
going to need the morale, right? It's going to need that excitement again. So, do you think are you going to become roaring back, next year when or hopefully next year when we can all gather together and how important do you think cannabis will be to that? And how important do you think is for New York State to get it right this next legislative session in the budget or whatever they have to do as a vehicle to get it done, to provide some economic hope and just some hope for people in general that we're moving forward and that we can come together and that we have this promise of this new industry?
Okay, I'm really excited to be talking to you in August as opposed to in April. I feel
Yeah.
very hopeful. I was talking to a colleague recently, and while this has been one of the most emotional and trying times of my lifetime and my generation, uh, I think August is a brand new day, and I feel very excited to see the activity and the level of engagement frankly, from communities that I just not seen that support from before. And I think the motivation and the excitement to cause change, it's palpable, and it's hard to not want to support and to be part of that. And having that additional bandwidth and having these additional folks really take up the mantle, I think has been tremendous for a lot of us who've been doing this for a while and who are just feeling tired.
Yeah.
And to hand over some of that carry has been great, and to be able to sit back and say, okay, we've trained up some folks, and they're going to carry us the rest of the way, I think is exciting.
Yeah.
For us,
Yeah.
I'm excited about meeting folks. I mean, you and I do a lot of speaking normally at conferences and events, and that's waned tremendously. And
Yeah.
I'm grateful for it, to have that opportunity to have back to myself. But what I get out of those things are meeting folks like you, and folks that I just wouldn't cross paths with because of my limited bandwidth and my geography. And what I'd like to see happen is for us to think more about our communities. And for me, that's being Asian and Korean and an immigrant and adopted person. I come from a family with a person with disabilities, and to think more globally about what that means for the industry.
Hmm.
The disability voice has been absent in the cannabis community, except for the voices of veterans, and I
Yeah.
think that's a challenge that we need to think about and address. And so I'm excited. I'm
Yeah.
excited because I don't know what this is going to look like, and I don't know how we'll bring the industry and the advocacy groups together. I don't think that there is a clear cut path, and I think that there will be continued butting of heads, and I welcome that, because I think that only makes us stronger and more committed to a more just industry. So I
Yeah.
welcome those things, and I think you and I will be part of that. And we've got the battle scars to put us in those positions to understand how we can be best used by the industry. So I'm excited to do this with you.
Yeah, no, me too. And those are some excellent points, Kristin. I want to thank you for coming on. Is there any place that you want to direct listeners, viewers to go to connect with you, to connect with, what you're doing in the event space, et cetera?
Yeah, so the Maze Calendar is a free resource. It comes out every Tuesday morning. We're going to take a short hiatus for a couple weeks in August just to give my business partner, Annie, a little breather so she can enjoy her family for the rest of the summer. But we promote and highlight. We try to highlight people of color and women specifically who are doing great things in the industry. But it is a free resource to not only submit your event, but also to receive that information. Not a great business model, but a way for us to really educate the industry about other things that are going on. So we're always about highlighting and buttressing other folks.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And I thought, it was a great conversation, Kristin. And, this is really what it means to talk about the empire state of cannabis. It's very specific on what's going on in New York and unique, and because of people like yourself and the community that you're helping to develop.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed my time. Good luck with the podcast. I look forward to it.
Excellent. All right. Have a good one.
Thanks, Kaylin. Bye-bye.